This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House Podcast, episode number 118, recording here on this Thursday evening, the last night in June before we head on to July. Show coming out on Friday. And Nick, we have got a good one here. I'm Noah Grant, of course, along with Nick Maxson joining me as always. Nick, we've got a lot to talk about. Some Memorial Cup things that are kind of interesting in the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. That's an interesting tidbit that we can talk about. Evgeny Malkin and the Penguins and Chris Letang. It's not looking so hot anymore. Also,
I told you.
in the weekly roundup as well. Main portion of the show, we're going to talk about the big one, the Minnesota Wild dealing Kevin Fiala. What does that mean for the Wild and their next steps in the off season? The Stanley Cup final is finally over. Some fun facts about that, and we finally get to stop talking about the Colorado Avalanche. Thank God. And lastly, extra ice session. Pretty interesting article coming out in The Score about Alexander Mogilny, and we're going to take a look at the Hall of Fame and talk about kind of their balloting process and see if there should be a little bit more transparency out in that sort of realm. Without further ado, starting off as always, Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com.
Huskies Illustrated Weekly Roundup, Noah. And before we get to some more local chatter, shall we say, we need to head up north to the CHL as the St. John's Sea Dogs beat the Hamilton Bulldogs in the 2022 Memorial Cup yesterday in New Brunswick. This is their first win, for instance, 2019, a second title in franchise history, that is first going back to 2011. A couple of prospects in here. New York Islanders prospect William DeFore was named the Memorial Cup MVP. He led the tournament with 7 goals. St. John securing its place in the Memorial Cup final after going 2-0-1 in preliminary round robin action. Before participating in that, the Sea Dogs went 39 days between games after being eliminated by the Rimouski Oceanic. No good players have come from that organization, have they? For those playing the home game, Sidney Crosby. Yes. In the first round of the QMJHL playoffs, Cedars actually fired bench boss Gordy Dwyer following their early exit and replaced him with interim head coach Gardner McDougall. I don't know what to think about that. That's bizarre, right? It's the timing. Your season technically isn't over yet. And what the actual hell?
Yeah, so here's the thing about the Memorial Cup. For those who don't know, it's kind of like, similar to the Olympics where, wherever location tries to get a bid to host the Memorial Cup. But in this case, it's CHL teams. But think about it like this. Let's say the Olympics are held in Japan. The difference between the Memorial Cup and other tournaments is that regardless of if Japan went 0-4 in the Olympic prelims, they would still make the medal round. That's kind of how you look at this. And the CHL is the same way, where the host team, regardless of their performance, will make at least the round robin play for the Memorial Cup for the final 4 teams. Part part of the reason there's been a lot of people that have talked about this being an asterisk because of that fact. And other people are saying, well, you still had to play the games and they got the job done. They went 2-0-1 in the prelims and they won the game that mattered against Hamilton. St. John, the reason that they had a coaching change, interestingly enough, they were, I believe, the highest scoring team in the CHL this year. And they ended up getting bounced by like the 9th place team out of 16 in the playoffs or whatever it was. They got bounced by a very lower seed that they shouldn't have lost to. But their saving grace was that they were the host team. So they got a chance, another kick at the can, had a coaching change in those 39 days and ended up going on and winning it all. It's a unique format that you don't see in a lot of sports, much less hockey in general. I don't know how to feel about it. Like on one hand, like I get people's frustration, but on the other hand, like, dude, that's kind of cool. Like is this
cap circumvention in the coaching way?
I'm not sure, but like how cool is
that way, doesn't it?
Well, like you're down and out, and you're by the grace of whoever, your one saving prospect is that you just happen to be the host team that year. You come back 39 days later, not playing a game in almost a month and a half, and you get the job done. Like, part of it is kind of like, well, that's BS, but part of it is like, kudos to them. Like they didn't roll over and die. They had to play the games and they got it done.
It's a lot of time between the drop of the puck too, right? So what you always wonder about rust, and in that short amount of time, you wonder what impact a change of coaching can do.
Yeah.
Because again, as you mentioned, highest scoring team in the CHL, you got to imagine that if anything, it was more of like, you're pulling the starting goaltender, unless you're Patrick Waugh, you get hung up there to drive for 7 or 8 goals. But maybe that's what woke the team up. I mean, I can't imagine, again, you're doing much drastically different than under the, old head coach. So if anything, it's a wake up call. It's, it's shaking the boots a little bit. But yeah, as you mentioned, you still got to go out there and perform and execute. And they did. And like you said, unique circumstances. And I'm not sure we'll see something like that for a while.
I'm just imagining Gordy Dwyer just sitting on his couch holding a beer with his mouth just totally open, just staring at the TV like, really?
Right. So, but yeah, how about this? Let's press on because we're going to stay with the CHL, and it's a story we've been following for the past almost probably a month now, I would say, Noah. And this has to do more with the fallout from the alleged, I suppose the lawsuit, not the alleged, but the lawsuit. Yeah. So how about this? Scotiabank, Canadian Tire, and Tim Hortons. So these are all big corporate sponsors of Hockey Canada. They are suspending its support for the organization as well as the Canadian endeavors for the World Junior Championships. Now, this is large, Noah Grant. Mm-hmm. And this is large for a couple of different reasons, because as we've been following the calls for testimony in front of the Canadian government, because again, Hockey Canada does receive public funds to be able to do its operations. That's always nice, but as we all know, money talks. And you kind of wonder, with 3 pretty prominent sponsorships, now, keyword suspended, not ended. Now, granted, suspensions can be indefinite, but this you might see a little bit more fallout than what we're seeing, I suppose, with the testimonies.
Yeah, I kind of like suspension better than ending. And the reason I say that is because, if you have a sponsor who ends association with you, you're kind of starting from square one, and you can go out and kind of do your own thing. At this particular point, this kind of puts the onus on Hockey Canada to do the right thing here. And then when they're able to do the right thing by, demonstration of those sponsorships returning, it's almost kind of like getting the voucher of the people, so to speak, again, in some senses. Because, I mean, don't get me wrong, they're corporations, but they are representative of everyday life, especially in a Canadian market. So, I kind of like this move. It makes sense, and it kind of says, Hockey Canada, figure your crap out, get it done. And I think things are progressing. We've talked about this. It's going to take some time, but we are moving in the right direction, and this is just another step of that. But threw it in there because I thought it was kind of an interesting little segment, and definitely, I mean, it's our only Hockey Canada news of the week. It's small, but it's not insignificant, as you had mentioned.
No, it's very impactful. I think we're going to see some fallout from that here relatively soon, more than we're seeing with maybe some other things that we have been following. Speaking of impact, how about this? Detroit has finally inked a new head coach, former Iowa Wild head coach Derek Lalonde
Yeah.
spent the last 4 seasons down in Tampa as an assistant to John Cooper. So he's got a couple of Stanley Cup rings, right? Knows GM Steve Yzerman pretty well. This will be the 28th coach in franchise history for the Red Wings, which leaves only Boston and Winnipeg as the only 2 NHL teams without a head coach. Apparently, Jim Montgomery has been interviewed in Boston. So was David Quinn. That's at least a couple of names have been thrown around as far as Winnipeg. I haven't heard a ton of names on Winnipeg. I think just today I saw Jeff Blashill kind of surface as a name that they maybe kick the tires on.
Yeah.
But going back to Boston, as you know, Jim Montgomery, former Denver University head coach and then Dallas Stars head coach, had some personal issues, took some time away from hockey, rejoined as an assistant with Craig Berube in St. Louis. So he's actually at least gotten back into the NHL circles. So interesting, very interesting. But for Lalonde, that's a great hire by Yzerman.
Yeah, and it's good to see these guys that have really paid their dues get their kick at the can. I think it's easy to look at your John Tortorella's, your Barry Trotz's, and say, you know, that's the guy that we want. But sometimes when you look internally and people who either know a system or know a general manager system and know how to play into that, that's a big asset too, because you know, the Detroit Red Wings are not going to win a Stanley Cup next year. Let's just put that out there right now. But they have a lot of key components that have really started to, you know, flourish down there. You know, Lucas Raymond, Moritz Seider, a lot of good young pieces that they're able to build around. And this will be another stepping stone for them. And like you mentioned, Boston and Winnipeg, the only 2 teams left. Sounds like from what I've heard that Jim Montgomery is all but signed, sealed, and delivered for the Bees. So I wouldn't be shocked to hear that in the next couple of days, but haven't really heard a whole lot from the Jets. And I think part of that reason is I think they were probably one of the front runners from what I heard when it comes to Barry Trotz. And now they've kind of had to circle back and kind of go to the bottom of the barrel again, so to speak, in relative terms. There's a lot of great potential coaching candidates that can coach in the National Hockey League. So they're both going to get it done, but it sounds like the Bees are a little bit closer so far. But congratulations. Detroit found its one key piece on the front office side, head coaching side, if you will. And now it's time to improve that on-ice product.
It is lots of cap space to play with too for Detroit, and also a couple of high draft picks as well coming up for the Red Wings, who are trying to get back to playoff prominence after some multiple seasons now, not having made, 27 or 28 straight playoff appearances?
25.
25. Okay.
25. Yep.
Still a hell of a run. Either way you slice it, right?
Yeah. I just hear Ben Holden's voice in my head. He's like, dude, that's crazy, man. Like I hear that.
Yeah.
Him sitting with, hey, of all things, a Tim Hortons coffee cup. He's not a supporter of Hockey Canada. He can't be, right? He loves his Tim Hortons.
Yes, he does. Absolutely. Speaking of Boston, GM Don Sweeney inking a multi-year extension as part of another signing. Toronto re-up defenseman Timothy Liljegren, a 2-year deal at $1.4 million annually. Down in Dallas, netminder Scott Wedgwood has signed a 2-year extension down there, as well as Buffalo. How about this? Bringing back 41-year-old Craig Anderson for his 20th NHL season. Good for Craig Anderson. You talk about a goalie, well, just how about an athlete and a person that's gone through quite a bit. Craig Anderson is one of them. And good to see him get another kick at the NHL ice for his 20th season, barring he can stay healthy.
Yeah, $1.5 million is for the year for Craig Anderson. Actually, more than Scott Wedgwood will make annually. Scott Wedgwood is at $1 million each year. And I think that the fact that Scott Wedgwood is at $1 million maybe signals question marks for Braden Holtby and where they see him sitting into the future in Dallas. I thought he had a pretty good year with the Stars, all things considered. Kind of a little bit of a mini bounce back year before his injury right before the playoffs. But Scott Wedgwood has been a serviceable backup in the National Hockey League for a long time.
And I think the emergence of Jake Ottinger has Dallas looking forward and looking that they're probably going to need some extra money to re-sign him probably as early as next season.
Yeah, it's in fact, I'm trying to remember. I think Ottinger is an RFA now, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong.
You might be right on that. Let me check.
We did do a Central Division preview for those who didn't get a chance back in last episode, in episode 117, where we kind of took a little mini deep dive into each team and their cap situation and what it means for them. But I'm trying to remember Ottinger. It's either this year or next year that he's an RFA.
He is an RFA right now as we speak.
I was going to say, so they're looking for
some. He'll be a UFA. So in other words, I think what this signals is, as you mentioned, Is it going to be Braden Holtby or is it going to be Jack Ottinger? I would think, just by what we've seen, I think it's Jack Ottinger and Braden Holtby. Does he come to Minnesota now? I think that's the obvious thing.
I was gonna say, I mean, there's, but like you say it in jest, but like, and I think
it's actually possible.
Yeah, I think someone will offer him a pretty decent little price tag. Minnesota only has $7.5 million cap to work with. We'll talk about that later as well too. But
sure.
Yeah, Craig Anderson, 20 years in the National Hockey League. He
awesome.
seems to never go away, and of course, he's been through a tumultuous ride in the past half decade or so. So wishing him the best of luck in Buffalo, because wishing everybody the best of luck in Buffalo, because Buffalo's Buffalo. Although I did see that Kim Pegula has been in the hospital for the past couple of weeks. So wishing her health the best as well. The health of the Eastern Conference. Speaking of signing news, reports are coming out that Evgeny Malkin and the Pens have not been talking regularly after engaging in their initial discussions when the club season ended on May 15th. This comes from The Athletic and Josh Yeo. Yeah, numerous agents and some people within the organization reportedly believe it's pretty unlikely that Evgeny Malkin is going to return. So
I completely agree.
And I know that we talked about, Chris Letang is kind of the front runner there. Meanwhile, they've offered him a 3-year contract, but the star defenseman wants a 5-year deal with a cap hit north of $8 million per year. Now, Chris Letang was 7th in Norris Trophy voting this year and had a pretty decent season, and Evgeny Malkin had 42 points in 41 games. So they both had productive seasons, but they are getting older. I think Pittsburgh is
injured to hell every single year.
I think that Pittsburgh is really scared about the term on that one. I don't think it's so much $8 million per year, although I think that's a pretty hefty price tag. I think 34 going to 37, it looks a lot different than 34 going to 40. Like that's
the risk goes up exponentially every year.
Yes, it
especially
does,
with a history of injuries on both players.
So $23 million in cap space. One way Pittsburgh is expected to probably clear that cap if needed. Defensemen, they've got a surplus of D-men. Kind of sounds like another NHL team we know. Marcus Pettersson, Brian Dumoulin, John Marino are all kind of the candidates that potentially will go. Pettersson seems like the one, 3 years left, $4 million annually is probably the most likely to go, because 22-year-old Pierre-Olivier Joseph is ready for a full-time NHL role, and he and Pettersson both play the left side. So that's pretty much found money in P.O. Joseph if you're going to keep him around. So, Pittsburgh, suddenly we looked at that and said, yeah, they could do it. They could do some finagling and get it done and make it happen if one of those guys took something somewhat team friendly. But boy, it seems like both those guys want their money in their last probably big contract of their careers.
And I think I had made the argument too that I think Malkin, I did not see him coming back more because of his injury prowess. And Malkin's been pretty sure-footed on his value, at least in his mind, what he's worth for playing. And as you mentioned, he's still a point-per-game player when he plays. But again, he has not had a healthy season in at least 2, if not 3 seasons, if I can recall, Noah. Yeah. He's had some significant injuries. And again, when you get to this age, that risk of re-injury just continues to go up. And again, with that cap hit and things are already tight around the league, every dollar matters. So that one, I could see eventually them signing him, but he's going to have to really retract not only on the term, but also on the dollar amount for him to get back into Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it sounds like Malkin is also off by about 2 years in contract length as well, too. So Pittsburgh has some finagling to do. Sadder news, moving north back into Canada. The man who was credited with the game winner, I say credited, you'll hear in a second why, for the Toronto Maple Leafs' last Stanley Cup, has died at the age of 82. Jim Pappen spent 5 seasons with the Leafs, 2 Stanley Cups during that time, and also played for Chicago, the California Seals, and the Cleveland Barons. He had 640 points in 859 games. For those who are wondering, Nick was alive when California and Cleveland still played in the 60s.
So in other words, he played for the grandfather of the San Jose Sharks.
Basically, yeah. If you're ever bored, for young hockey fans out there who haven't gotten a chance to look, I mean, Cleveland had some interesting unis too, but you got to look up the California Golden Seals uniforms.
The white skates. Oh my goodness.
They are something else. They're almost like football jerseys. They remind me of maybe like the Chargers. And they're kind of like shoulder style, I guess. But the reason I say credited with the game winner, and we wish, of course, Jim Pappen's family the best during this time. But he was given credit for Toronto's second goal in a 3-1 series-ending victory over Montreal in Game 6 on May 2nd, 1967. Also, coincidentally, is Nick's birthday. Line mate linemate Pete Stemkowski actually deflected this puck in, but allowed Papin to take credit so he could earn a contract bonus. Talk about a different era.
That wouldn't happen today.
Is that pre analytics and video replay?
That would be effectively, you kind of wonder at that point. I don't think there's an off ice official that was really looking at that, and they probably just asked the players like, "Hey, is that yours?" Yeah, no, it wasn't off my stick. It hit the fence. Now it's him. Probably.
Yeah. Imagine if that was the case. I mean, obviously we had Wayne Gretzky, so we got to see, that, star flourish. But imagine if Maurice Richard ended up being the highest scorer in NHL history, and it turns out that he's like, yeah, probably like 300 of my goals I probably didn't actually score, something wild like that. He's definitely, though, Nick. He's definitely in the Hall of Fame. Our second to last topic here. Hall of Fame news. This kind of ties into our extra ice session. Vancouver Canucks icons Henrik and Daniel Sedin and also Roberto Luongo headlined the Hockey Hall of Fame's induction class of 2022. That's no surprise there. All three very great players. Daniel Alfredsson and Finnish women's national team star Riikka Salainen are the other players joining them, while Herb Carnegie has been inducted posthumously as a builder. So pretty good entries there, I think. We're going to talk about maybe an entry that was snubbed, though, in the extra ice session. So we'll save that for a little bit later. Last topic, Nick, injury news. We're finally getting the reports of what's come out of the Stanley Cup final for Tampa Bay on their side of things. It's
yikes.
It's I think it's bad for both teams. I'm guessing Colorado too, but it's a lot better when you win.
Right.
Braden Point, significant quad tear in Game 7 of the first round against Toronto. That one was kind of well known. Nikita Kucherov, MCL ailment. Of course, he's had some real issues with his knees and ligaments in his lower half of his body. Anthony Cirelli, sprained AC joint that may require surgery. Ryan McDonough, his finger's pretty messed up from all reports, and it also sounds like
mangled.
Yeah, and it also sounds like they're trying to get him to move his no trade clause and move him from the Lightning as well too. So he'll have to point the finger over where he wants to go, although it might not be where he thinks.
Oh boy.
Oof. Pierre-Edouard Bellemare playing through a meniscus injury that he suffered even before the postseason began. Brandon Hagel, a foot fracture in round number 2. Ouch. Nick Paul, who I thought was fantastic this postseason, sprained AC joint and an MCL sprain, and Corey Perry has a sprained AC joint of his own. So
I can relate to Brandon Hagel on a foot fracture. I'll put it that way. Read the play better next time. Why don't you? Yeah, right. For those playing the home game, that sucks. Not that you didn't have to hear it like that, but it's worse when you have the skates that we have now. Because they're so form fitting. There's really no padding. Your part of your body is literally absorbing all the energy. And because the skate is wrapped so tight, you kind of, how do they skate on this? So the skate's wrapped tight, and I'm assuming there's some what we call pain management that's being done. But when the injury is first suffered, I mean, trust me, when you take your foot out of the boot there, let's just say that you know pretty quickly something was really major, because the swelling then has a place to go. Not speaking from experience myself by any means. So it's not fun.
For those who want to know, nursing time with Noah, if you do have what's called edema in your feet from such an occurrence, Rice pattern, obviously, but more importantly, the first part of that, elevate your foot, elevate it. Let that blood flow move back down to the upper part of your body. Boom, science. Someone else who's going to be elevating their extremities, our last guy here, Florida's Anthony Duclair, who finally enjoyed a breakout season. Yikes. 31 goals, 27 assists for the Panthers. The 26-year-old, he's going to be out, what they say, long-term after an Achilles tendon tear during an off-season workout. So wishing him the best of luck as he moves through his recovery.
Likely a full season out, likely.
Yikes. Yeah, for sure. I would say 6 month minimum, probably 10.
That's probably pre-workout and pre-back into game shape. So that's going to be a tough one. For to come back from, for sure.
Yeah, not good. We're going to talk about some tough ones. The Minnesota Wild losing Kevin Fiala as we head on to our main show. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast. Nick Maxon alongside myself, Noah Grant, episode number 118. Welcoming you on what will be the 4th of July weekend. I actually have the 4th of July off from work, and I've been asked am I doing anything exciting for the 4th of July? And my response was sleeping, eating, trying to reset for work. Obviously, Nick, and I'm sure you're probably in the same boat. Maybe you get a day off, but I'm guessing it's probably right back to work for you after that. But 4th of July weekend, obviously kind of the height of summer, really, if you want to put it that way, pushing into July here. Weather's getting warmer, I'm sure, especially down in Minnesota. And not a lot of hockey going on now, but still a lot to talk about, Nick. But first of all, 4th of July plans, anything big?
Family stuff, really.
Yeah.
Just again trying to breathe in. The little time.
Remember to breathe out too when you.
Oh, I'll write that down. But no, like you said, it's interesting when you get like out of school, and granted, for my person, it's been like this for a while. It's just always boom, boom, boom. But for those, it doesn't feel the same when you're past a certain point. You get an extra day if it falls on a weekday, and then it's like right back to reality again. It just doesn't have the same pomp and circumstances it probably did when you were younger. But good to enjoy a day with the family, extended family, and hopefully relax, eat some good food, and watch some fireworks, and hopefully not lose a limb in the process. I think that's the goal.
Yeah, I think it's easy for me to speak to say that I work nights, but I believe the 4th is on a Monday, correct? So that's kind of it's basically a long weekend for people. Yeah, it tells you, like in my head right now, it's literally like next Tuesday. It's not good. But speaking of moves done, not on Tuesday, but on a Wednesday, the big one done for the Minnesota Wild. They got it out of the way early. Kevin Fiala to Los Angeles for their 2022 first-round pick at number 19, and defenseman Brock Faber, who is a 2020 second-round selection at number 45, plays for the Minnesota Golden Gophers, and he'll return for his, I believe, junior season.
Is it junior or senior year?
I think it's junior. I think it's junior. I could be wrong. Kind of an interesting quote, Nick. As we did confirm, for those who don't know, this will be spliced and edited accordingly. But for those who are curious, Nick Maxon just clicked the wrong tab and exited out of our show. So there's that. And Kevin Fiala's time has exited in Minnesota, and Billy Guerin had this to say, quote, "It just didn't fit. We've been down the negotiating road a couple times with Kevin already." So it sounds like there was some back and forth. I mean, we know that, even before this year, but it sounds like even before this, just sounds like they just weren't in a good spot with his agent, I think. Not that negotiations were sour, but I think that they were just in a spot where they just didn't match. Knew. Yeah, and he said, hey, look, he had a great year, and we knew we just weren't going to be able to do it. We knew that. Fiala's team knew it. There's no sense in trying to screw around and trying to fit this in and trying to do that and give him a low ball deal. It's not going to work. We knew we were going to have to move him. And I kind of respect that, and I think that we talked about the Kevin Fiala piece. When you do it at the beginning of the summer, it makes it a little bit easier to stomach, because by the time you get around to training camp, the new fit for the Minnesota Wild is starting to bud. And actually, a phone call from former guest of the show, Bob Motzko. Billy Guerin called him to do some lowdown diligence on Brock Faber. Bob Motzko said he's an athlete. He's a world-class skater, conditioned athlete that can play all night long. He's already proven that at our level and on the international level. Of course, don't forget, correct, world junior champion, and also on the Olympic stage as well, too. His offensive game is going to continue to improve, but he's already a world-class defender and can play all situations. And I truly believe his offense is going to continue to grow. He's also tougher than snot. He's going to play for a long time in the National Hockey League. So high praise from the former St. Cloud State bench boss. And I agree. I mean, the guy eats pucks for a living. His idol is Jonas Brodin. And to be honest, he plays that similar style where it's not a flashy style. He reminds me of maybe like if you took Carson Soucy and Nick Seeler and kind of put them together a little bit. You took Nick Seeler's physicality and Carson Soucy's skill and kind of just meshed them together and created a hybrid player of that. But he's probably even better than that skill-wise, I think.
Add in Jonas Brodin's feet.
Yeah, seriously.
Yeah, no, 100%. He was one of the better players on the USA Olympic roster. He was very noticeable during that tournament run, although USA didn't medal in that tournament. A couple of things with this, right? First of all, yes, we're done with this, thank God.
Yeah.
Number two, I'm still waiting to hear somebody say blow it up.
Oh, and it's been absurd.
I know. Number 3, you have to understand the Wild's position in this trade, because I know
Zero
a lot
leverage.
of zero.
Yeah.
If you're the opposing GMs, and I'd say that plurally, you know the Wild's. It's not a secret where the Wild's position is, especially on the balance sheet.
Yeah.
And you know that there's no way you're going to re-sign him. And I think Bill Guerin, I think some people are taking Bill Guerin's quote a little out of context when they say, well, I can't believe, when he says, I'm surprised he didn't create a GM versus GM, or like, pitting teams against teams. Well, no kidding, because that wasn't going to happen in this case. There was not going to be a bidding war. If anything, if he did that, I would argue that his return would have gone down. So I think that, again, being straightforward, I know there's people who don't like the fact that he's going to the same conference. I can see that a little bit.
Yeah, so Bill Guerin actually commented on that, and he said we had multiple suitors, but he said if you cut the league in half, sometimes you're just not going to get a deal done. And the piece of this is that LA, had both $8 million to toss at Kevin Fiala. They had a first round pick and a second round prospect that arguably could have been a late round first, the way that he's developed, to throw at the Wild. And
And to jump in real quick, Noah, to finish the thought, I think what caps this all off, don't tell me that teams have not been calling on Kevin even as far back as February in the trade deadline. I think Bill Guerin had a sense of the market. I think he felt like then, he could have traded him then. I didn't expect him to, but he could have if the offer was right. Yeah. But again, the Wild had zero leverage, which means if anything, the longer he waits, the more the value goes down. He struck, I think he probably, with the Kings, who were all in from what we're hearing in reports, they were willing to go with a top prospect as well as a first round pick. Yeah. And again, to Guerin's point, when you get that offer, you don't create a market that you don't have. You have zero room to pull strings, and you make the deal happen. So I agree with it. I like the timing. The return, are you going to replace 80 some plus points offensively? No, probably not. Maybe you could.
But we got to see if Matt Boldy continues to develop, if Marco Rossi makes the jump next year. And at pick number 19, it makes sense for LA, who's got a pretty young prospect pipeline to really work with, to kind of throw that out there. Here's the thing. You want to talk trade grades a little bit. I think if Kevin Fiala develops into half the star he was in Minnesota, A+ for the Kings. Good move for them. Sure. I think they get a primetime winger in the prime of his career. Minnesota, I would say, based on where they were at and kind of with their hands tied behind their back, B+. I think a very good move for Bill Guerin, I would say. I don't put it in the A category simply because, unfortunately we're at this point, money-wise. Right. But I was thinking about this, Nick. I was thinking about there's a lot of people, you can tell people that really know the market and pay attention, and people who are just the casual snap judgment fans, by taking a look at this, or not even taking a look at Brock Faber. Now, could Brock Faber not pan out for the Minnesota Wild? It's entirely possible. That's possible. That's the NHL. But I was thinking about, what is a trade comparison that matches this? And I was thinking about a team that essentially is making a deal almost for like a rental, in a sense, where they don't have a lot of leverage on the last year of a contract. And my thought, 34-year-old Claude Giroux going to the Florida Panthers. So the Florida Panthers sent Claude Giroux, Connor Bunneman, and German Rubstov and their 5th round pick next or 2 years down the road as part of the deal. In exchange, the Flyers got Owen Tippett, who's a fairly high end. He's been a bubble player NHLer right now. A conditional 1st round pick in 2024 and a 3rd in the 2023 draft. So that 1st round pick will be Florida's 1st rounder in 2024, unless it's top 10 protected. Then they get the 2025 1st rounder regardless. And that was kind of my thought. Like, that was the price for a rental player that was basically a point per game player, even though he's 34 years old, and a team that was selling at the deadline, and they had not a whole lot of leverage, but they had a good player that they knew was kind of on his way out. It's not a perfect comparison, because it's not often that you see RFAs that are dealt like this. But for me, it kind of gave me the vibe of a deadline deal. And look at the return. Claude Giroux, a point per game player, a prospect, and a 1st round pick, plus some other brouhaha on top of that. But really, when you come down to it, a high-end prospect, that's played in the show already, and a conditional first-round pick that will be a first regardless. That was kind of my comparison. I think Bill Guerin, it's not perfect. I think people wanted a prospect coming back that was, big name, and Brock Faber maybe isn't that guy, but I think all things considered, it's a good move, and now the Wild have a chance to take their next steps.
And for those who don't understand, whether it's draft picks or whether it's prospects, they're poker chips at the table, which means, does Brock Faber even stay with the organization? Do the Wild package 2 first-round picks and move up in the draft? Because there are some teams, Philadelphia with Chuck Fletcher at the helm, that will trade down. At least he's expressed interest in that, according to some at The Athletic. So what do the Wild do, right? We know they need help at center. What do they believe is the status of Marco Rossi? Do they believe that he can, quote unquote, earn a spot on a training camp?
It sounds like it.
It sounds like it as well. And so at the end of it, where do you think you're at? Again, the Wild were a first-round exit. So are you that close? So I think Bill Guerin wants to hang on to those first-round picks. Again, you have another right-shot defenseman in Matt Dumba, who is not the same player as he once was.
Contract year this year.
So the last year of his $6 million 5-year deal. So does he become trade bait? Again, he's not the offensive player that we have seen in the past. And, so is there going to be more changing of the guard, not only because we need the money, but also does Matt Dumba just not fit the system anymore? We don't know. So again, I feel like there's more moves to be made, Noah, but still a lot left to see. But it's good to know that the return, at least you can do something with the return, whether it's you keep what you have or you package them up and you do some other kind of trade.
And you know where you're at now, and you've kind of returned to relative normal as far as offseason plans. So the Wild have 3 UFAs, Nick Bukestad, Nick Delorier, and Jordy Ben. Jordy Ben's definitely gone. Nick Bukestad, maybe I could see as a serviceable,
league minimum.
Yeah. Nick Delorier, I don't know.
I don't think he impacted the way that they were hoping.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
So what is the Minnesota Wild's next plan? Bill Guerin said, quote, "It's a priority to re-sign Middleton, who can become an RFA starting on July 13th. He has yet to get an answer from Marc-Andre Fleury as to whether he plans to re-sign or go to free agency later this month.
He will test the market.
Yeah, I think he will too. So the Wild, I for sure take care of Middleton. That's step one. And then after that, see where the chips fall. He talked about draft stock. We've talked about, do they package picks and try to move up in this draft? I saw somebody was like, well, they'll package it for third overall and get Logan Cooley. No, they won't. Shut up.
No
team's taking that.
Logan Cooley. No.
Yeah, and the third overall selection is Arizona, and they need all the help they can get. But the Wild do have 7 selections in the draft, and as we've seen from Judd Brackett and company, they are very good at drafting. Before this, they were tied with the lowest draft pick in the first round for the Minnesota Wild, which was 24th overall. Ironically enough, that's where their conditional compensatory second round pick came in this year's draft, because they didn't sign Mr. Johansson from all those years ago from the Paul Fenton era, who was 24th overall.
2018 pick.
Yeah.
Yes,
so they have.
Sounds right.
So the Wild 2 first rounders at 19 and 24, 2 second rounders at 47 and 56. Now remember, Minnesota was originally they would have picked at 40, but now they're picking at 47 because their second rounder went to Chicago in the Marc-Andre Fleury deal. But the second rounder that they have in addition is Vancouver's from Arizona. The Wild do have a third rounder, a fourth rounder, a fifth, and a sixth. They did trade their 7th rounder for a 2020 5th rounder in the Devin Dubnyk trade to San Jose. So, Nick, do you believe in this process? Do you believe in the draft class? Do you believe in the picks that Judd Brackett has to make? We kind of have some information related to, where people go as far as picks, percentage-wise, and whether they'll become a star. Really, I think the percentage-wise is, do they play in the show? Picks 1 to 5, 98% chance that they'll play in the show at least. 6 to 10.
Your name is Neil Yakupov.
Yeah, seriously. Although we had a little bit of a resurgence in Colorado, but that's neither here nor there. Picks number 6 to Yeah, picks number 6 to 10, 89%, 11 to 20 is 75%, and then after that it kind of really drops off. So the Wild are really kind of in that threshold of, trying to find a diamond in the rough, but as we've seen in past drafts, we've seen players go from 15 to 25. That's kind of the area where the scouting team kind of makes the dough a little bit. That's where you find those guys that you look back in drafts years later and you say, wow, this team took this person at 13, but at 18, so-and-so was selected and they were unreal. Like I think Matthew Barzal was like a 15th overall selection or something like that in the draft. So you can find guys that are premier NHLers in this time. It's all about the scouting.
And some of it's plain luck.
Yeah, and should the Minnesota Wild, Nick, should they be confident in their scouting team?
Well, they have to be. That's what you're paying the money for, right? I think the question is, Noah, I think, again, you try to ask Bill Garrett, how do you replace the production for Fiala, right?
Yeah.
Do you do it through the draft? Do you make it via trade? Is it already in your system with Marco Rossi? All of these factors play into the draft, which is coming up in, a week?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a week. In fact, I'm trying to remember. Why don't we look up the actual date so our listeners know? But Nick, right. and the other thing is too is like, the Wild made their thing with Kevin Fiala. Kevin Fiala may never pan out in LA.
And that's again, hockey's such a goofy game, isn't it? Where the line chemistry can be won. When we saw that with Fiala, Boldy, and Gaudreau. We also seen it where. Look what Evander Kane did to Connor McDavid as well as Leon Draisaitl. Holy cow, right? So it's again, you just don't know until you see him play. I'm very curious, Noah, what they feel of Marco Rossi right now, because I do think that has a significant impact on how they will draft, especially in the first round.
According to The Athletic and things that Michael Russo has written in multiple articles, he's talked about they expect that salary cap hit. They expect that to be at the NHL level. They expect him to make the jump, I think. And in fact, statistic-wise, of course, the number 9 overall pick, the draft coming up is a week from today, Thursday and Friday, July 7th and 8th. So you are correct. In fact, Marco Rossi had a very productive year, and I don't want to get the stats wrong, so I'm going to look it up right now.
While you do that, Noah, what's important to know about how the Wild have changed the way they've used their development system is so significant, because again, with Marco Rossi, we see the raw talent, we see the skating, we see the IQ, but when you're in Iowa, right, and you're a 25-minute a night player, you're getting put into situations such as on the power play, on the penalty kill, and where you're learning facets of the pro game, where if he does in fact make the jump, and I think all signs are pointing to that, he's ready to go. He's not going to look out of place. Look what Matt Boldy did. He spent some time in the AHL. He made a quicker transition, and he's looked not out of place. Like in the playoffs, I think this year gave him a little bit of a wake-up call as to how tough this league can be. But as far as regular season wise, was pretty good, I think.
Yeah, so the Iowa Wild did not make the playoffs this season. They were 32-31. They finished 6th. So not exactly the greatest year for Iowa, but 63 games for Marco Rossi, 53 points, 18 goals, 35 assists, which is par for the course for a guy who was scouted primarily as a playmaker, 46 penalty minutes, and plus 11, which I think, you talk about it as, the stat that's broken, but plus 11 on a team that was essentially 500 and didn't make the playoffs is a bigger testament than you think, especially on the forward side. So
on the center side, not to speak. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that he makes the jump. The question is, what's the Wild do with the draft? And here's the thing: you lost Kevin Fiala. That happened. You hope Matt Boldy continues to flourish. Marco Rossi alleviates that pressure. Kevin Fiala. Yes. Did he have a heck of a year? He had 33 goals. Yes. But he was also this guy, and we've seen this in Minnesota, where sometimes for a couple games, a week, maybe even a month, he kind of disappeared a little bit. Now that's normal. Hockey players go through ebbs and flows throughout a season. But like I said, LA might have just signed a potential 7 to 8 year dud. Like you have no idea. Now, Kevin Fiala, I think, is going to do fine. I think that needs to be said.
Right.
But at the same time, Minnesota is now on to their next step. and they're going to have to obviously replace Fiala's production. But besides Kevin Fiala, the Wild they're the same team. And last time I checked, they had a pretty good season last year. In fact, the best in franchise history. So there's a lot of pieces that they have to work with. And what's even more impressive is they have $12 to $14.5 million in dead cap on top of this. Imagine if they didn't. But it's almost forced Minnesota and Bill Guerin to make the right moves and really think critically about what this team needs. And I think the Wild have been better for it. Sucks losing Fiala, but now they're on to the next thing. And I think Marco Rossi might be one of those guys.
In time will tell, right? And you kind of will see, right? Because when free agency opens, if they trade for a center or whatnot, that'll give us an indication of where they believe he is, and do they need some insurance from Marco Rossi? Because again, you're into year 2 of Kirill Kaprizov's 5-year deal. You know that you need to give him the want to stick around. Again, 113 points, best season in franchise history. That's nothing to scoff at. That was a hell of a season. And just real quick on Fiala too, Noah, right? The game breaker of Kevin Fiala, right? The argument is thrown around pretty loosely of how, okay, but that game breaking thing could be a big reason that you move on in the playoffs. We haven't seen that from Kevin Fiala. In fact, we've seen the opposite, right? So
just in the play-in round against Vancouver was really the only time we saw it. Yeah.
Yes. Now, so he has the ability. We've seen that, but the last 2 effective playoff runs, I should say the last playoff run, he was pretty quiet. Now, part of that is too, Noah, is that your opposing team is scouting, your greatest threats, and you are definitely paying more attention to those players. Kaprizov, holy cow, did he essentially bust through any sort of defensive armor that they put up. 7 goals. Was it 9 or 10 points in the playoffs? I believe it was 9. So he did okay. But again, you got to support that. I think the Wild are very close to the Edmonton Oilers in a sense, where they have in years past. What I mean by that is you have some pretty good high-level players, but you don't have that same depth. Again, going back to Colorado, we'll touch on it later again, but real quickly, Nazem Kadri, I think he really was the cornerstone piece that got Colorado to the Stanley Cup.
Him and Valerie Nichushkin, 2 guys that maybe you wouldn't have selected in this roster to be those guys. And, and you're building towards the future. And, of course, don't forget Colorado, not even a decade ago was once the laughing stock of the NHL, and now look where they are. So, there's big moves to be made. My final question before we jump over to the Avs, Nick, the other side of this deal, Brock Faber, we've kind of mentioned him here or there. For those who really don't know about Brock Faber and don't realize the value that he brings back in this trade, what are the Minnesota Wild getting in the hometown Golden Gopher?
So what they're getting is a smart, smooth skating, tough, good positional defenseman. Again, he's comparable to a Brodin. I would say he's more comparable to Brodin than a Soucy Sealer mix, because he's tough, but he's not really sort of like, you call it like the doorkeeper, if you want to call it, right? Has some offensive instincts. We've seen that in the playoffs, even this last year in the NCAA.
He's an Olympian,
So he reads plays well. He can walk the blue line. He can get shots through. But more importantly, the defensive end, he can really take care of business. And again, I think for the casual fan, again, being a right shot defenseman, also with those skill sets, I mean, did we not just find a replacement for Matt Dumba? If you're going to look at it that way, I don't see it necessarily the same thing, because with the Kalen Edison lovers, but here we go.
And you talk about the draft picks too. Jesper Wallstedt last year at 20, and then you have Carson Lambos, who you throw him in with Kalen Addison, and him and Brock Faber. That's kind of the trio there for the Wild as kind of their primary A-level.
They're building from the goaltending on out, and
that sounds like Minnesota Wild hockey, doesn't it?
Stanley Cup champions have done that in recent. That's right, Tampa. And just because since you mentioned Wallstedt, he was recently, I think, in the top 17 or was 17 of my top 20 prospects. I haven't cracked the NHL yet. I think Marco Rossi was 9. I think that was a Hockey News article that was posted. So Wallstedt, it looks to be the real deal, which is good. You've got Lambos, Addison, Brock Faber,
Jack Peart, Sam Hedges,
Damian O'Rourke, Carson Lambos. You've got you could have up to 5 Minnesota Wild defensive prospects in the World Juniors this August. Think about that.
Not
Holy
too
cow.
not too
Not too shabby,
Yeah.
but
And
they
then
still don't have a freaking center.
and they get a chance, of course, the Wild do to have a close look at Brock Faber as he probably enters what will probably be his last year with the Gophers. 6'0", 190 pounds, a right shot defenseman, only 19 years of age. His 20th birthday is coming up in August. The Maple Grove, Minnesota native. You mentioned Tampa Bay. Well, close but no cigar for them on the three-peat. Colorado does win the Stanley Cup. It is their third in franchise history. 1996 and 2001 were the other ones, beating Florida and New Jersey respectively, 4 games and 7. Of course, Ray Bourque in 2001. That just gives chills every time I watch that.
Time.
Yeah.
Wow.
So some kind of fast facts and figures here. Cale Makar becomes the first NHLer to win a Hobey Baker, a Calder, a Norris, a Conn Smythe, and a Stanley Cup. Oh, by the way, he's 23, Nick. He's 23.
Is he good?
Yeah, he's all right. Also has a gold medal at the World Junior Championships. How about that one?
The only thing he doesn't have is an NCAA championship.
Seriously,
he doesn't have.
Yeah, thanks, Max Veach, and an Olympic gold for that matter.
Right.
But yeah, so Colorado, like we mentioned, third cup in franchise history. They've never been on the losing end of a Stanley Cup final. They're only the 4th team ever to win a cup in all of their first 3 final appearances, which would be the Montreal Canadiens. The original Ottawa Senators, the St. Louis Eagles, is actually who they were.
Right.
The Toronto Maple Leafs as well. So, you know what's interesting? They're now tied for 11th in Stanley Cups. You know what's interesting? There's actually not a lot of teams that have won a Stanley Cup. 105 champions.
You don't say.
105 champions. I think that
really speaking to the audience that has never seen a Stanley Cup.
But exactly what I'm saying though is I think that Wild fans are encapsulated, and I think a lot of other fan bases are too. We've never gotten a Stanley Cup. We've never gotten.
I can name you all the teams currently that haven't won a cup. You just let me know.
Yeah, well, I can name you all the teams that have won a cup. How about this? Montreal has 23. Toronto has 13. Detroit has 11. So there's a huge chunk from the original 6. Boston, Chicago, Edmonton, Pittsburgh, the Islanders, Rangers, and the St. Louis Eagles, the original Ottawa Senators, all have 4. Right. Colorado, New Jersey, and Tampa now have 3. Los Angeles, Philadelphia, and the Montreal Maroons have 2. And then Dallas, St. Louis, Calgary, Anaheim, Carolina, and Washington for current teams, plus 7 now defunct teams way back in the day.
Way back, yeah.
All have 1, and that's it.
Yeah.
That's it, dude. So the Lightning, we're looking to become just the 6th team ever to win 3 straight Cup finals, and the first since the New York Islanders in the early 1980s. But they are the first to go to 3 straight finals in the salary cap era, and the first since the 1980s as well. So, Nick, 2 heavyweight teams that went back and forth on this one. Tampa easily could have forced a Game 7 if they got another bounce or 2 in the first period and kind of put that one away in Game 6. What did you think of the Stanley Cup final first, obviously? And number 2, what can other teams around the league take from this templates of teams that were both juggernauts to start the year, but also made some significant moves? And I'm sorry, Tyson Jost. I'm sorry.
And yes, you're welcome, Nico. Not Nico Hischier, Nico Sturm. Wow.
Yeah.
My mind is still out east. Holy cow. Great Stanley Cup final.
Yeah.
You talk about Colorado being, the heavy favorite even from the season opener, effectively. Tampa, again, back-to-back cup winners. We know what they can do, right?
Yeah.
A couple of things. Colorado steamrolled their way to the cup final. A big reason they did that was speed. This team was the fastest team all season long, and they used it in all 3 areas of the ice. I think a lot of teams, especially in their executive offices, will be looking at that. Just because, again, it didn't matter which line Jared Bednar threw out there. They were on pucks defensively. There was no time or space for you to do anything. Just ask the Tampa power play. And really for the Avalanche, the back checking. Holy cow. Even with how high flying that is. How many times you would see Nate McKinnon or Darren Helm, guys who can still motor, come back through the middle and take up, trailing wingers or trailing defensemen. For Tampa, they were able, to a degree, find at times a way to slow them down. And that was no easy task. I think it took them home ice in Game 3 to figure out the matchups. Yeah. I think a big reason Game 6 ended for Colorado was not only were they still without Braden Point, the number 2 center, they lost Anthony Cirelli, the number 3 center. in that game as well. So depth down the middle, Minnesota Wild fans, I don't need to tell you anything more than that.
Yeah.
But again, Tampa's so creative in the way that they enter the offensive zone, where they can kind of push you through, but then kind of hang out top of the circles, find those seam passes. Their power play was a little bit better down the stretch, but more so Andrei Vasilevsky again. I think he was a big reason that they extended it to 6.
Yeah.
So two different teams, two different styles, both fighting for Sports Ultimate Trophy and not dropping it before the photo op. My God,
Yeah.
what the hell are you doing?
Whoops.
I'm sure there's probably, and it looked like it was just the base,
Yeah.
not the actual trophy.
And for those who don't know, there's actually 3 Stanley Cups anyway, so it happens. But and
it's a heavy trophy, 35 pounds.
Yeah, those things actually happen a fair often amount, especially during the celebrations, in the summer as well too. But it's pretty impressive. You have to give Tampa Bay their props, and to be where they are, to go through the injuries where they were, and to basically come within 1 game of having a shot at a 3rd Stanley Cup. I mean, that's an impressive run for any team, and they were the juggernaut. They were the team to beat, and they just ran into a Colorado team that had a ton of firepower. But
they were on a mission.
It's crazy. Especially the core. Poor Corey Perry, by the way. But
oh jeez,
especially thank goodness he has one from 2007. But it's it's interesting because Tampa went from being the dominant team, which I thought they were a fair amount, maybe not so much in round 1. I thought Toronto was pretty good and shows how good the Maple Leafs were and probably could have went. Definitely dominant in round number 2, round number 3, a slight hiccup in the beginning, but then really asserted, their game at the tail end of that series. Stanley Cup final, Tampa was kind of like, when you go to the mall and your annoying little kid brother tags along, and no matter how hard you try to lose him, he somehow sticks around. You know what I mean? Just because in a lot of those games, they were outplayed for the majority of those games, but they were opportunistic in their chances. They had flourishes, especially game 6. We talked about the first period. They were the dominant team, but in the 3rd period, they didn't register a shot until the 10-minute mark, So you talk about Tampa and the way that they were able to win high-scoring games, low-scoring games, games where they were dominant, games where they were outplayed. They had a lot of recipe for success. They just finally met their match in a Colorado team that was 1 step quicker and probably a little bit healthier than they were. When you go on
100%.
When you go on 2.9% of 3 Stanley Cups for the Tampa Bay Lightning, that's a toll on your body that it takes on a core and a short offseason and a long regular season, albeit even with the COVID pieces as well too. Don't forget their first Stanley Cup was won in August, so
right.
So there's a lot of things that go into play. But this Colorado team, scary team. They're going to lose some pieces. Nazem Kadri has kind of indicated he wants to stay, but he wants his money too, and he's going to get it somewhere.
Chuck Fletcher will sign him to a mid-year deal, even though you can only sign him for 7. Yes.
Gross. Unless, I guess technically Colorado could technically trade his rights like tomorrow, and then they could do it. But anyway, beyond that, maybe they'll trade him for Kevin Fiala. Here's the thing is that these two teams, it's not often that you say, because Dallas made it in 2020, Montreal had the wild season in 2021 and then disappeared as a franchise this year.
Nice.
These are two teams where it's not often you see 2 heavyweights go at it, but it's not often you look at 2 teams and say, yup, they earned this. They earned every bit of this to be here. A lot of times there is a lot of luck that goes into, getting to a Stanley Cup final. These 2 teams earned it. And I think that when you look at Tampa Bay, they were not the powerhouse of the Atlantic this year, but they had the pedigree. They had the 2 Stanley Cups. And it's also not often that you look at a 2-time Stanley Cup champion, back-to-back champion, and then you look at a team that comes from the division that the Minnesota Wild play in, and you look at both of them and say, you know what? I'd be happy if either of them won. They're both equally deserving. You have a chance to three-peat as a Stanley Cup champion, or you have a chance to dethrone one of the best teams in hockey and start your own legacy for a Colorado team that has had the core for a long time but has really never gotten over the hump. I mean, well-deserved. A very entertaining Stanley Cup final, to watch.
Yeah. It really was. And again, I think a lot of people wrote off Tampa after Colorado went up 2-0. I stayed firm that going back on home ice, let one get away in game 4, came back. And again, to go back home on the road. You can't go back home on the road. That doesn't make sense, Nick. And then we're able to win in Denver. Again, even John Cooper said, yeah, the altitude's a thing. It definitely affected his game too. There's no question that the altitude does affect you in Denver. And then to have a chance to go back home, you score first, and it was not a great goal by Darcy Kemper to give up in Game 6. Jan Ruda with no deflection, no screen from the half wall. And granted, it's a hard shot, but right at him, he missed it. You could have gone either way with that, right? No way.
Game 5.
Yeah, it was
Game 5.
That was Game
5.
Was that 5?
Pretty sure it was Game 5.
I thought that was 6.
Yeah, it was Game 5 because that was the game that the Avs lost. Remember? I think I could be wrong.
I could be wrong too. Either way,
I was still stuck on the part where you said playing at home on the road at home, and I immediately thought of the Arizona Coyotes again.
Oh yeah, but I mean, I think the bigger point is Darcy Kemper didn't look that great in games 3, 4, and even Game 5.
They almost didn't need him. That's the crazy thing.
And that's on the MNCAA podcast. Not to shameless plug, but we talked about how Darcy Kemper was kind of the antithesis to the Eastern Conference Final, where you had two really good goaltenders in Shesterkin and Vasilevsky going at it. And at the end of the day, the way that Colorado was built, he just had to be average. I mean, his stats weren't great, but again, Colorado played that up the ice style. They wanted to be in the offensive zone. He just needed to make a few saves here and there.
And he's now a UFA. So
and he's a Stanley Cup champion.
Yeah, how about that? Pavel Francouz, Pavel Francouz, I think had a pretty decent little run too as well. But a lot of people have tweeted that now Darcy Kemper, best goaltender in Wild history. Ouch. Anyway, beyond that, who is the best goaltender in Wild history, by the way? I would
technically by the record, isn't it? Backstrom.
I would say Backstrom. Manny Fernandez was pretty good.
Dwayne Rolston
was pretty good. Not anybody recently. That's all we're trying to say. Without further ado,
I thought Brizgalov was up there.
Here's the thing. Dare I say this? I mean, to be fair, he brought him to overtime of Game 6 of the second round, which is as far as the Wild have been since 2003.
True.
He was very serviceable at the tail end of. I mean, only made one save in that Game 7 against Colorado and the Nino Niederreiter goal, but then he was serviceable in the Chicago series against one of the best teams. In that
kept him in it. Stanchion Gate. And let's not forget, too, he was the third string goaltender because Backstrom was out with a groin. I think Darcy Kemper went down.
Darcy Kemper got hurt in that game in the third period. And here's the thing. Chicago ended up losing in overtime in Game 7 to the eventual Stanley Cup champions LA Kings because Alec Martinez scored. So, I mean, you think about that, too. He was fairly serviceable. Devin Dubnyk, I'm not going to say he's the best ever, obviously, but he was – in the first couple of years of his career in Minnesota, looked pretty good and benefited from a defensive structure in front of him. I
think he had a honeymoon resurgence too, honestly.
Yeah, he did. But there's not another name after that I really think of that I go, Cam Talbot was really good this year, but that was 1 year,
and you kind of wonder where Cam Talbot's head is at too if Marc-Andre Fleury does decide to return. Because, again, going back to, a position of need, Cam Talbot is coming up in the last year of his 3-year deal with the Minnesota Wild, a pretty team-friendly deal to boot, right? And you kind of wonder, is there a little bit of friction there between Cam Talbot and maybe the general manager? Hard to say. We'll know for sure. But do you really think Jesper Wallstedt is ready to go next year? I would think not. But again, we talk about wingers and centers. Minnesota Wild have quite the goalie conundrum approaching them at the end of this season. And heck, if things go upside down, dare I say, it could even be earlier than that. So we'll have to watch the goaltending carousel that's about to take place here for the Wild, and it's coming up pretty quick.
Well, good thing they have a ton of cap space. Anyway, that will do it. That will do it for the main portion of the show. We will head on to our extra ice session. We're going to talk about the Hall of Fame. And welcome into the Extra Ice Session, episode 118 here. Nick Maxson joining myself, Noah Grand. Nick, an interesting article came out in The Score. And now, for those who follow The Score, it's not exactly known as the cream of the crop, prim and proper for
or investigative journalism.
Yeah, and electric articles, but this is one of the best ones I've seen on the site in quite a while, and it was talking about how Alexander Mogilny, essentially playing for Buffalo for the majority of his career, the 13th consecutive year that he was snubbed for the Hall of Fame, and they kind of compared him to some of the players. So Alexander Mogilny, 990 games played, a 1.04 point per game clip, 1,032 points. Compare that to Daniel Alfredsson, who has just over 120 more points than him, but also played in like over 350 more games than Mogilny. And comparing Marty St. Louis, Paul Correa, all these guys that had a similar points per game, a similar point clip. Probably the best comparable, I would say, Paul Correa, who was inducted in 2017, 989 games, so one less game, and 989 points. Had less points than Mogilny, obviously played a tad later than Mogilny at the start of his career, so to speak. But why is it that there's some of these guys that for whatever reason, especially in Alexander Mogilny, the first Russian to essentially defect from his country and take the risk of his life being ended to come play hockey in North America,
and his family's life to be also fair,
and has the argument to be in there as a player for sure, but if not, then maybe as a builder for that action alone. Why is it that there are some guys that just continually get snubbed? And does the Hall of Fame need to be a little bit more transparent in the way that they go about things? Because we never really hear about the process. It's more, oh yeah, this player was selected and this player was rejected, and there it is.
Let's go with, I'll answer it this way. It doesn't change anything even if it does become transparent.
Yeah.
Here's why I say that. You have players, personnel, whoever, right, that become Hall of Fame eligible every year that are different. And it's kind of like the baseball Hall of Fame, right, where we've seen players get left and you're like, how in the hell is this guy not in Cooperstown, right?
Yeah.
It's no different. I believe, though, that balloting is public information, if I recall correctly, for the Baseball Hall of Fame. And at the end of the day, I don't know how you explain it, Noah. I don't know, because, we had this conversation about the Hobie Baker sort of voting, right? We've had this, you can almost have the conversation about MVP voting. And it's just, what are the people casting their ballots? What's their priority like? No, I think we need to set the stage a little bit different, because essentially what the score is insinuating is that there's some sort of blockade for Alexander Mogilny. Am I correct on that? Essentially, there's a concerted effort to keep him out of the Hall.
So Buffalo News, Mike Harrington,
who's a credible source.
Yeah, one of the reporters says that there's a sentiment that maybe there's a feeling Mogilny won't participate in any of the induction ceremonies. He didn't come to Buffalo in 2016 for the Greater Buffalo Sports Hall of Fame ceremony. That's kind of just how it rolls. But again, we've talked about, the first Russian to be named captain of an NHL club. He is third in goals and fourth in points among Russian players all time. 76 goal season along with Teemu Selanne's rookie season, but he did 76 goals in 7 fewer games than Selanne. Led the New Jersey Devils with 43 goals at 31 years of age, 79 points at age 33, leading the Leafs. He has all the accolades. My question is, even if he's not at the induction ceremony, does that mean that his on-ice production suddenly makes him not worthy? I would say by the numbers alone, and by the accolades for his country on top of that, and especially doing a lot of these feats at an older age for a long time. He played from, the 90s all the way through until his retirement in 2007. He was just good. He was good.
Well, don't we have this thing called technology where you can be on a Zoom call? Have we not sort of accepted that as kind of everyday life now?
Yeah. And who cares?
I don't know.
I don't know what his English is, but who cares?
The other thing, that's assuming that's what's happening, right? That's a predicate. That's the narrative that's being played. Is that really what's happening with the ballot people, though? I don't really think if you're casting a ballot, you're asking the question, oh, he won't be there, screw that guy. I don't see it that way, Noah.
But my question is, if, for example, the Sedin twins, very deserving of their entry into the Hall of Fame, and then Roberto Luongo. Do you take Roberto Luongo, who granted different position, but also had a really great career, and you look at Alex Mogilny? Is that the be-all when you have, there's a lot of players. There's only so many entries into a Hall of Fame induction each year, 4 or 5 players. And if you have 2 players who are neck and neck, but one of them is going to be at the ceremony and one of them is not, is it still right to not take the other one? But we don't know that. You're absolutely right. But I think that's kind of the preface of the conversation we're having is, does there need to be a little bit more understanding of how the process works? Because if you have 2 players who are equal in caliber, why shouldn't they both get in?
You're asking basically what you're asking is, does the ballot holder hold a prejudice against casting a vote to a player who may or may not show up to the freaking ceremony? Is that what we're asking? Because that's essentially what we are.
I mean,
I meant it to sound silly, and I'm not. This is not a gas on you all, but I'm picking apart the score article for a reason, because at the end of it, it's dumb. I'm sorry. I'm going to come out and say it. It's a dumb article.
You got to read it. You haven't read it then.
Okay.
You do.
Well, we'll put it this way. Even if you make some compelling arguments, I still feel there is an argument to be made. Is that, are you really saying that over 50 or so people who vote for those who are in the Hall of Fame are on a concerted effort and are looking at who's going to be?
But it's not just it's not just Alex Mogilny. I'm just saying that's what was reported. Don't shoot the messenger here.
I'm not. I'm trying to understand why this conversation is being had, and you got to give me more than that, is what I'm saying. And when I say
so here's another piece. Okay, Peter Forsberg, Eric Lindros, Pavel Bure, Jaromir Jagr. Those are the only players to have finished with a higher points per game than Mogilny since he retired in 2007. It's superior to Teemu Selanne, Steve Yzerman, Joe Sakic. Goal total better than Pat LaFontaine, Peter Stastny, and Pavel Bure, and it also exceeds Paul Correa. That's
I get it.
It's confusing. You know what I mean?
State for the self, but we're not asking the accolades of the player. They're asking why the writers or whoever's voting for the Hall of Fame, why are they not seeing that, and why are they not putting their confidence of him being deserving of a spot in the Hall of Fame?
Right, and that's and that's my question is, why are there some players who statistically, granted, I don't think he ever won a cup. I could be wrong. Well, he might have actually with New Jersey. Yeah. But that's the thing is when you have guys that have similar accolades to guys who are in the Hall, at that point, when do you start asking the question? I'm not saying that him not showing up to the ceremony, we don't know. I mean, he could show up to the ceremony. We don't know.
And I think and again, whether he does or not, I don't think, at least for me, wouldn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Even if we knew the answer.
Yeah, the question is, where is it coming from? Where there's some guys that, they have all the credibility that you talk about when you talk about a Hall of Fame guy. He's got his cup, he's got his point production, he's got all of these things. He's as a pseudo builder, he was one of the first to defect and come over to play in North America. He's got all of these things. So what gives?
I'm going to go on a limb a little bit here, because the game of hockey, we've talked about the culture of hockey and maybe some of its negatives, right? But I think we're maybe some positives, and the positives that could well turn back into a negative. Let's go that way. It is a very close-knit, small community, right? And Alex Mogilny, and just bear with me as I go through this explanation, he was never one that really wanted the spotlight. He was never one that, really wanted the attention. He did his job. He did it well. He enjoyed what he did, but he really wasn't there to, raise the cup, go to a camera and say, interview me.
Same with Paul Correa.
Right. But Paul Correa has a bit of a different, the story for him, he follows him. I don't know. You almost, at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is you kind of wonder if maybe with the people that he played hockey with or were around with, whether it's reporters or whoever that are voting, just never really got to know him that well. That kind of thing.
So therein lies the question. By the way, one of only 30 players in the Triple Gold Club, gold medal in the Olympics, World Championship, and a Stanley Cup. Also,
his accolades are there.
Also a 6-time NHL All-Star. But the question is, does there need to be more input from former players, different aspects of the media? Does there need to be like a fan voting thing? And I say that loosely. Like, I'm not saying the fans are going to vote the Hall of Fame, but I'm saying, are there other components and aspects that we need to throw in, that are more than just what the committee does? The committee need a shakeup, or does the process need a shakeup? Is what I'm trying to ask.
I don't think so. And I say this why. We're talking about one player, right? Now, I'm not saying that he's the only one that's in this position by any means. Now, if there was some sort of, revolt that you could say, yeah, or some consensus effort that you could really point to and say, yeah, no, people have banded together, there's text messages, and say, yeah, no, I'm not voting for Mogilny because he's Alex Mogilny.
Yeah.
Okay, sure. You're never going to get that. So I don't know. I mean, let's put it this way. Do the stats alone make somebody a Hall of Fame player?
They do if you win a Stanley Cup. That's what we've been told for years and years. We talked about Alex Ovechkin, one of the greatest shooters of all time, and the argument was he wasn't going to be in the Hall of Fame until he got his Stanley Cup. He did. He got it, I
would argue that if he did not win a Stanley Cup in 2018 but breaks the goal scored record, he's in there no matter what.
Well, yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Now you're talking about the statistics again.
That's what I'm saying is, we changed the goalposts, and it goes back to my original point, which is it's a whole picture of things, and transparency doesn't solve it. You could have a review, but again, they're human beings. These are subjective animals. They're going to have an opinion. They're going to have something here or there that's going to sway them one way or the other. And again, and this is where it actually hurts Alex Mogilny, is he's been out of the game for a while now. And when you have namesakes come up like the Sedin twins, like Luongo, like Alfredson, who they deserve to be
They're
there.
all deserving,
sure,
yeah.
They're all deserving. But you kind of all of a sudden start to be, pardon the expression, but you kind of start getting put off to the side and you start collecting dust a little bit as your namesake, right?
Yeah. You mentioned a name, by the way, who was also obviously mentioned in this article for comparison. Daniel Alfredson, we talked about it. He had the same point total in 230 more games. Obviously has a lot of highlights on the international stage, but I believe does not have a Stanley Cup.
No, he does not.
You know what I mean? That's
right.
That's where I think that a lot of people are asking the question about, Hall of Fame parity, so to speak. I know, like on the women's side, Megan Duggan, Julie Chu were both, nominated for this as well. And Megan Duggan, of course, is in a front office position in the National Hockey League right now. It's a question that I just was curious about, and I kind of read through the article, and again, I wasn't expecting much from an article from the Score, and it kind of, if anything, it made me think a little bit about, is there something that needs to kind of be repostulated here? And when you compare Daniel Alfredson, who was just admitted into this induction class, and his numbers are not only comparable with Mogilny, his accolades are not only comparable, but he has one less Stanley Cup, and he also took 200 more games to get to the same point production that Mogilny did. Now, granted, Alfredson played in a little bit of a later time frame, so you take that into account, I think. But beyond that, it's a curious case to me, and I think there's more than more than Alex Mogilny that are probably the victim of this. And not that we need to start entering people left and right, but there are some guys that you look and you go,
I think, and again, you're going to have, just like Angel Hernandez and how he can't call a freaking game, you're going to have missed players that deserve to be in the Hall that don't get added.
Yeah.
And as much as, especially in today's world where there's, whether it's sports or anything else, there's video replay, there's data, there's all these things that we can go back and say, no, this happened, or no, this didn't happen. Wild fans still think a goal went in. Was it Niederreiter?
Oh, against Dallas.
Against Dallas.
Never happened.
No, it did not.
Yeah.
No, it did not. Unfortunately, that's just the way it works. You're going to have these, absentees, if you want to call it that, probably deserve, and as we've touted with Mogilny, everything points to him having a spot in the Hall of Fame. The problem is the Hall of Fame isn't an earned spot. It's an elected spot.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. I mean, isn't that the issue with the United States right now? Anyways, so things
it's
are
weird. It's
are
weird though.
elected.
You'd think that the elected spot is earned by the
right,
play, but
and that's the idea of it, right? But the problem is that's not how it works. It's bad because again, we're focusing on one specific player. As we've said, it's more than him for sure. And you kind of wonder, will there ever be a case, whether does Mogilny's name continue to get brought up, or just somebody else? Let's take Austin Matthews.
Yeah.
Let's say Austin Matthews trolls Leafs Nation and goes to Arizona, never wins the cup, but he scores 60 goals a season. By some of the comments we've seen, and you brought it up, he never won a cup, so that means he's not in there. Well, why does it have to be that way?
Right.
So it's weird. And let's just say that it's 10 years after he stops playing, he's still not there. Well, one of the greatest American-born goal scorers of his time, how the hell is he not in the Hall of Fame, right? So more of this is going to happen. And you kind of wonder, to your point, I mean, you can't really prevent that, because what you're essentially, the argument we're making is, how do we prevent players that statistically are more than not deserve to be in the Hall don't get left out? Again, it's not like you have to score 1,000 goals and you got your spot on a bronze statue in Toronto. It's you got to get the votes, and it's a curious case. There's no question about it.
It's a very human issue, and
it's a human issue, and it sucks because there's no way you can fix that.
Yeah,
there really isn't.
What we would like to know, find us on Twitter at WarmingHouseDen, or drop something in the comments below here. We'd love to know what you think, and love to know if you have any input onto the Hall of Fame activities. Like you mentioned on the baseball side, Angel Hernandez keeps ringing my cell phone, but all I see is a bunch of missed calls.
Oh my gosh!
How about that one? Something you won't want to miss.
Something Drake picked up.
something you won't want to miss. So the Huskies Warming House podcast will be back in action for a regular Sunday release coming up on July 10th. We are going to enjoy the 4th of July holiday around here, so do have some more exciting things coming out for episode number 119. But I think that's going to do it for us here. So for Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL!
Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.